A little tip with moving things around your report canvas is if you actually drag something, you may notice it sort of snaps to an imaginary grid. And so what's quite handy is to hold the Alt key. And as you drag it, it literally glides and doesn't snap. So be aware of that. The other thing is just using your arrow keys on your keyboard to nudge things to the left and the right, and to nudge things up and down is also a handy little tip. Now with this population for Europe card chosen, I'm going to press Control C, Control V to make a duplicate of it. And I'm just going to move it down to here because now I want to look at the population density. Now on the fields pane on the right hand side, because I duplicated that card, it's working with the population query or table when it should be working with the density table. So I'm expanding density and I've already got population expanded. What I'd like to do now is to actually tick density and untick population. So we'll start with population. We'll take this tick off and it's just disappeared from that slicer because I have it chosen. And we're going to instead tick density underneath the density query. So that means that this card is now reporting the density data from the density table rather than the population data from the population table. Now if we then go to the filters task pane, we need to make some changes here. Now on the filters task pane, I want to remove continent. So continent actually has an X here which allows me to remove this filter. So I click that and that's now removed. What I now want to do is grab the continent from the density query or table and drop that onto the filters task pane. And from there I would like to be able to tick Europe. And so I've chosen the Europe density continent. Now something that we didn't look at when we were working with the filters pane earlier is we didn't look at the padlock. We've looked at how we can expand and how we can collapse and how we can remove a particular filter. But if you don't want the user to change the card from representing Europe, then you would actually hit this little padlock and lock it. And I think we should have probably done that with all these cards to date. So I'm going to hit the padlock and lock that filter in. So this filter, this card, is always going to show the continent Europe. Now I'll just collapse the filters pane. Now looking at the visualizations pane and the field setting here, it says density here. And if I hit the drop down, I can see what it's doing is it's actually summing the density. So I want to change the sum to average because I really need to see the average density. And by doing that, I've also affected the label that appears at the bottom here. Now in the fields section, right here of the visualizations pane, I'm going to hit the drop down again. We chose the function average, but now what I want to do is I actually want to rename this visual for this visual. So I click this option here, and instead of calling it average of density, I'm going to put average per kilometre. And I really need to see squared. So I'm going to hold the Alt key and press 0178 on the number pad and then let the Alt key go. And by doing that, I've acquired a squared at the end of my title, average per kilometre squared. Alt 0176 is the shortcut key for degrees. Holding the Alt and pressing 0179 will give you cubed. But in this case, we held the Alt and pressed 0178 on the number pad and it gave us squared. Now the other thing I want to do is now while I've got this card still chosen, get into formatting this visual. So I'm going to click this option here. I'm going to go into the card value, and in the card value I want to change the display units from billions back to auto. And so now I'm starting to get a realistic figure here. It showed me nothing when it was on billions because the figures just weren't in billions. I also want to set the decimal places to 0. So it's 0 decimal places. I don't need that, otherwise huge level of accuracy. So 0 decimal places, show me the decimal digits in auto. I also want to set the color to a different color than blue. I'm actually going to go for this one here, which is numbered F5C869. And so that's a yellow sort of representation of the color. I now need to create this card. So I'm just going to make sure I'm happy with the height of it. I think it's a little bit too high. Yep, now I'm happy. I'm now going to duplicate this, Control C, Control V, and I'll just move that underneath the Asia image, and Control V, and move that under Africa. Control V, Oceania, and Control V, the Americas. And all I've really got to do is click on this card, go to the filters pane, expand the continent, take off Europe and put on Asia. Click on this card, expand it, take off Europe and put on Africa. Click on this card, again expand it, take off Europe and put on Oceania. And click on this card, expand it, take off Europe and put on North America and South America. So we need both of those, and collapse that and collapse that. So now I'm seeing the average population density per square kilometre for the year 2020. Again, if I was to hit this drop down and change it to 2000, all of these cards will recalculate for the year 2000 based on the data that I've got. Some of the data is not complete and therefore will appear a little bit inaccurate. So those are some more slices.